Right, come on then, Maui. What's your bad point? Come on, let's move it on. Let's keep going.
Yeah, mine is just the amount of LARPing we have in Tier 1 Counter-Strike. Just all these players that just think they can take up this role and then just, shed it like nothing. I mean, we've got, lately, it's been Device, who's actually admittedly looked okay as an in-game leader, but then now it's just like everybody's switching over. I mean, Yakinder obviously did it last year. Snacks is now doing it somehow for Gamer Legion and then G2. Like, technically, let's also remind people with the Snacks angle, one last thing, he did not actually qualify for the major with that Gamer Legion team. Like, let's just make that incredibly clear that with that kind of roster, I guess that's like maybe that's maybe actually the requirement to be a G2 in-game leader, that you have to not qualify for the major at least once. So beyond that, I mean, we had Electronic, who was doing it for a little bit for Navi, thought he could keep it up. Obviously, it looked disastrous when he was doing it for Cloud9. But now we have three other guys that are entering the fray trying to be in-game leaders themselves. I mean, we've got Twist is the marquee one here, as he's trying to do it for Liquid. But then for some reason, Hades is suddenly trying to be the in-game leader. And then beyond that, I don't even know why I'm bringing this up, but it's a big name. GG How has Caribbean as the in-game leader. It's like, what are we doing? Like, what does everybody think this role is just something you could just like put on some different trousers for the day and suddenly that's you? Like, it doesn't work like that. Like, you need to live it, you need to breathe it. And for some of these guys, it just feels like they can just kind of be tourists in this in-game leader space. If anything, throughout all of these people that are doing it for just these short spans of time, and will eventually, many of them will fail at it. The thing is that like now Nico's looking like one of the people that's making the more shrewd move, that he's the one that has actually experienced it for a length of time. He's the one that actually kind of failed while trying to do it, thinking that he could do better than Kerrigan. And then now he's just saying, you know what? It's actually not for me. And I almost, in a way, have to respect that decision from Nico at this point, just because he's the one with the actual experience doing that. I'm sure that I'm not even sure. I think that there's a likelihood that, when Hades or Caribou were coming up in this space, they tried it for a brief period of time in like tier 3 or tier 4 Counter-Strike. But Yakindar and Twist, I mean, like they're LARPing right now. I mean, Electronic 2 is just LARPing. I mean, their belief that they can just take over these teams and just take away the systems away from establishing game leaders and just succeed is just, it's pure cope for the fact that they didn't like the way that their in-game leader was either calling or worse, playing. The fact that they would even like invoke that when really it's a role that's more about how are you fitting into the team, how are you structuring round by round the overall macro game plan. And so I think this is going to be disastrous for some of these players who, in my eyes, are wasting some of their primes. I thought Hades was a totally solid player throughout most of the season. I mean, he had ups and downs, okay? He was inconsistent, but some of his highs were very high. And I feel like now he's probably going to hamstring his career. I think that Twist is probably going to see a degrade in performance. And I'm just going to be real. I think Caribou is just getting a bag right now. So I'm not good for him. Good for him. In fact, you know what, Caribou, keep getting that bag. Get the GG How bag.
Yeah, fair play. Yeah, I mean, listen, we can also point out, Nexa going the other way, and he's now just a player. So shout out to him, because I always felt like he was never a real IGL either. Yeah, I'm with you. And I also think that I'm trying to think of the reason of this, and it's almost like I don't think we get that many like new teams coming to top events anymore where there's like an in-game leader where it's like obvious is the next guy. If I were to pick that right now, I'd say it's probably Sin on M80, and I actually think he is good. But it's kind of like, where is the pipeline of the in-game leaders moving up through the space? Because all of those lower tier teams in general, I feel like they're actually just recycling in-game leaders. It's like Ents just pick up Glaive, and they either just keep recycling in-game leaders until we run out, or they randomly switch players to in-game leading. So I guess it feels like there's that lack of progression for in-game leaders specifically. I guess the one example outside of that is someone like Shuhei, who actually managed to. But yeah, I think that seems to be a big problem, because like you said, it is a role where you absolutely need to stick to it. Oh, I guess Kixan's the other one who has come up, so fair play to him. But yeah, it just seems like for whatever reason, it's the role that we get the least new blood in, when it's most obviously, to me at least, the role that we have the least overall ability in right now. So I don't know if that just speaks to the game becoming more individualized, or it's harder to come up with a team nowadays because you don't see teams really breaking through or breaking into top events. But it is a concerning thing, because a lot of our in-game leaders are getting old. Like, at some point, Carrigan's going to retire, and we're going to get to the point where it feels like there's not that many great in-game leaders left, which will be very concerning, because that's a huge part of the game. It's probably the main reason a lot of people love the game when you're going as in-depth as we do.
The problem I have with this role is I feel like, I mean, I've made this analogy in the past so people know it already. Like the most obvious example of why people do this is the same reason why sometimes a rifler will become a primary AWPer for 1 or 2 months, which is when you're the secondary option doing it, you think you're getting a taste of what it's like to do it for real, but you're not actually aware that the reason you're getting a taste instead of the full course meal is you get to opt in and opt out. So in the same way as if you're the secondary AWPer, you can just be having a shit game, or they have just like, say, like a godlike T-side AWPer, and you just go, actually, this is the half when I'm not going to AWP. I'm just going to stick with my rifle, and there's no consequence to you. No one expected you to AWP all the time as a secondary AWPer anyway, and if you're just not feeling it, you're not feeling it. So the times that you would actually, because here's the point people aren't going to get, if you had forced yourself to AWP in that setting, you probably get torn up, and that's your really bad half, and you start to look shit, and people are going to go, maybe you shouldn't AWP. So in the same way, the problem with the IGLs is they nearly all come from the background of being a secondary caller. So it's even implied like maybe Twists was doing some of the secondary calling in fucking FaZe, and obviously like I'm going to guess this means maybe Hades did some calls in fucking Ents or something. They all do the same thing that Alu did in Sharks back in the day, and they think, but I did a bunch of brilliant secondary calls, so I'm sure I can do, you know, the base strat, because there's the other part that they're missing. And I actually feel like Kirby's a great example of this. I'll tell you why I think Kirby's doing this. I don't think it's just to get the bag. I think he's doing another mistake they all make. They act like IGL is some sort of an infectious disease you can catch by contact. So they're like, but I was around Glaive. It's like you weren't in his brain and you don't have his brain. Do you understand that? Like, you could feed in the same data, Kirby. You could watch the same VOD. You could even call up Zonic and have the same chat. But the problem is, at the end of it, you're going to have Kirby's brain and he has Glaive's brain still. Like, it's the reason why it doesn't matter how many demos Maui downloads, he doesn't become Glaive after watching them. Like, it doesn't matter even if we had the comms, we wouldn't. Like, there's still something in their mind, especially mid-rounding. You can't teach that. You can encourage it. You can help someone. The people who are the best mid-rounders, that is like a skill that like incredibly rare in my opinion. Like, it's a feel for the game that just comes. It's why actually the funny thing is, from what I've seen of what happened now in Heroic and Liquid, it actually seems like that might be Cadian's one IGL skill, and maybe he relied on it too much as a crutch, quite frankly. Maybe he wasn't willing to build out a system and a playbook and have other people have agency. Maybe he just lived and died off, if I make this read's right. So the problem I think you have is a lot of them also think, but I was on a team that had a great IGL. I was in the VOD reviews. I heard the strats. I've read the playbooks. And it's like, yeah, but the problem is, I do think that IGL is one of the roles that is the hardest to get really good at, because the job almost scales with like knowledge and experience. So you're automatically way behind all the other people. And as we say, what you're saying there, Hawker, plays against it actually, because they're all veterans. Because the premise is, even when you play in like round 4 of an RMR, you might have to actually play Glaive, the fucking goat of this shit. And even if he has a better team, a worse team than you, he might just actually fucking mind game you. He might just be in your head reading what you do and famously reckoning. Does no one remember that infamous first LAN back after COVID, IM Cologne, where it was a studio LAN, and Glaive with the scuffed Astralis and FaZe and Carrigan without fucking ROPS both took down like the best teams in the world. They just went there with the Heroics and the fucking Gambits of the world, and online those teams were getting them every time. And when it was LAN, Glaive and Carrigan just basically went like, watch this, and just showed you what a fucking IGL can do, and just and it was like they were fucking reading the Matrix and just making the call like, do this, do that. And you could tell in that moment, for real, teams like Gambit were like, what the fuck is this? Like, what? This isn't CS. It's like, no, the joke is, mate, this is CS. You were playing some loosey-goosey online bullshit. This is CS. This is where the guy who's the IGL, like, they can kill you dead, mate. The worst thing about it is, like I always say about AWPer, where the worst thing about AWPer is when you go against a better AWPer, you get made to look silly. The same thing happens at IGL. Even if you're doing low kit, let's say, by the way, all the people we mentioned get to a level where they could IGL to let you know that against everyone except the top 20. Well, the problem then is you go to the lands and you're going to be coaching against Snappy, into Carrigan, into Apex, it's like into Shuhei, into Kixan. It's like, bro, you already have to be top 10 to beat these guys. You might get a result of 1, or you can fluke it off the... Like, so my problem is, most of these people will fail at these roles. I even think, by the way, notice we all keep doing that to give them a chance. Because we were all somewhat wrong about Device, we all go, I mean, I guess Device did it. Did he even, though? Like, at the end of the day, here's what Device did. He managed to IGL to a level that looks fairly good, and he sort of kept like 98% of his skill, but no one still knows, is that actually better than if he had like Glaive back and he was just open again? Maybe the same lineup, but without Glaive would actually have won an event. Who knows, right? Because the problem is, Astralis didn't quite get there, did they? They sort of capped out a little bit. They've plateaued to some degree. So I even think if that's the one example, and by the way, anytime you're ever using Simple, Nico, they should be the outlier in almost every example. Like, they're not normal players, are they? Like, they've already sort of shown us they can do things none of us can dream of or even conceptualize. So, no, I just think nearly all those examples are bad moves. Like, even if, by the way, it is the case that Twists, for example, wants to do an Nitro, maybe he wants to completely commit to no longer be a Star Rifle and he wants to be an IGL. Well, I'll tell you the most obvious conclusion of that. I'm not saying you can't do it, but by the way, it'll probably take you a year and a half to get up to speed, and after that year and a half, you will have no individual game anymore. All that shit will have gone. By the way, just like Nitro. Nitro used to be a very good mechanical player, if people don't know. And by the way, when they had that super team, the 2019 lineup, if anything, you were getting more out of him than you should for an IGL, but he was never anywhere close to like winning an MVP. He could never have done it. Like, he was never going to, in fact, I think the best result, it could have been like a 1.1 rating for him. And even that was bonkers to get with like a fucking org back then. So to me, the other downside is if you commit to this, you also it's sink or swim. You either are going to quit, which you've just wasted everyone's time for that period of time, or you're going to become a good IGL, but now you're going to need a star player. So I also think the worst part about this move to me is the moves like the Twists one, because it's implied they think they can have their cake and eat it. And that's my only problem. If he really if Twists told me, bro, I know you think of me as like a mechanical player, but I actually want to just be a tactician. Strategy's what I get off, and I want to I would be like, you know what, I'm in for it. But then you better forget about being a HL TV top 20 player. And in fact, I would say to him this line, here's the banger line. I would go, where am I getting my Twists to play for you then? That would be my line I would say to him for real. Because again, I'm with you. There aren't enough IGLs in the scene. I will say that. North America, by the way, another scene, famously doesn't produce enough IGLs. That's why people like Daps. The joke is Daps probably could just walk back in Liquid if he wanted to. These are people I would take. They've got the experience, you know. So I sort of agree. This is why it's not as hard. It's just bad. Like, I agree with the premise. It's bad, but I can see why each person gets lured into it. Now it's not as stupid as they initially seem, you know.
I hate that the Daps point, I hate that I have to agree with.
So true though, isn't it?
Even just Nitro from NRG right now looking decent versus tier 2 competition, it's like, I honest to God would just take, if Nitro could pull it off like as an op IGL again, I would just say, just do it for Ultimate. Ultimate's completely unproven, and if you can get a lot out of Twists and Naf and Yakindar again, and JKS for that matter, this could be another incredible run for him.
Wouldn't that be spicy? Yeah,
it would be. Actually, it would be sick. I think they get a lot of fans back. Actually,
dude,
but I don't think they
just for the freak show element. Who the fuck wouldn't watch that? That'd be mad entertaining.
Yeah, and also the thing is, like, Yakindar's best performances with Liquid were when Nitro was in-game leading, like making grand finals in the World Finals and the ESL Pro League. So I don't see why he wouldn't trust him. Sure, he wanted to take it from him, but it could just be, you know, let's break bread again, you know, like extend the olive branch.
By the way, there's an obvious joke I never even thought of from the Yakindar era. Oh, you've nailed it. It's like what I said about Twists. Here's the obvious thing I'd say to Yakindar. Yakindar, do you know why it was working awesome when Nitro was like on paper the IGL, but you got to do whatever you wanted to call everything? Well, you know, when you were the IGL, you didn't have a fucking Yakindar in your ear all the time, did you, cunt? So it's not 1 for 1, is it? Like, where was the guy like you interrupting and giving all his take and going, in Eastern Europe we are doing this? Like, bro, I've always said this story before, but if I was their coach, when Yakindar popped up, like, but in VP, I'd be like, no one gives a fuck about Bandcamp, you can't. Shut the fuck up. You know, I won a Grand Slam. You won a Flashpoint. Whatever. It's the way by the way, it's the way I would even burn my own tournament. I know. That would be the ultimate betrayal too, because how could they say shit then if I say it as well? All you won was a Flashpoint, motherfucker.
Oh, man.
Okay. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.